Let's go back to the education promise from the Liberals today. They're promising to provide $1,000 a year in post-secondary funding to every high school student who wants to go to college or university. That amount would be $1,500 a year for low-income students. So let's take a closer look at the proposal, and for that I spoke with two guests in our studios today. Shelley Melanson is the National Deputy Chairperson of the Canadian Federation of Students, and Dave Quist is the Executive Director of the Institute of Marriage and Family Canada. Good to see you both. Thanks for being here to talk about day 4 of the campaign, and in particular this announcement about education. Shelley Melanson, let me start with you. The Liberal Learning Passport, is this the kind of announcement that post-secondary students in this country have been waiting to hear?
Well, we're certainly pleased to finally hear a political party talking about investment in student financial assistance that's non-repayable and actually is in the billion-dollar figure. This September, we made a huge deal about the fact that the Student Financial Assistance Act was actually amended to allow for students to now borrow up to $15 billion. Having said that, we absolutely have some concerns about the delivery mechanisms, but we're pleased to see that education is going to be a primary focus in their platform moving forward.
All right, I want to get into some of those concerns about the delivery mechanism. Quick question, what is the average tuition in this country now for a post-secondary university student?
So in terms of averages, you're sitting just at over $5,000. It obviously varies from province to province, but for our concerns, obviously tuition fees are of a great concern, but what that's leading to is epidemic levels of student debt. And so the average graduating debt for a 4-year degree student in Canada is $28,000.
Dave Quist, what's your reaction to this announcement today?
Well, education is an important factor. We want our young people to be able to move into the job market once in their chosen career. It's important that they have those opportunities. In today's global economy, it's important that they have those skills, whether it's in a trade or whether it's in a higher education aspect as well. I'm not sure this is the right vehicle to be doing that, but certainly the issue needs to be addressed and followed up more closely as well.
Now, what about this issue of the way this money is targeted for high school students moving into university or college, and specifically for them? Is that the best way to go, or there's some people are saying, look, if you have that much money to give, just give that money to families and let them decide how they fund education. But then again, that wouldn't make it necessarily spent on education.
Not necessarily, that's true, and so that's one of my concerns, is perhaps there's a better way to free up some of that money so that individual families have that flexibility, whether it's a single-parent family or whether it's a high, middle, upper-end family with 2 or 3 kids. I think there might be some easier ways to ensure that the freedom is there to support those kids that are moving from high school into post-secondary education. I'm also a little bit concerned about where the money's coming from, and that's coming from the
cutting corporate taxes.
Cutting corporate taxes. Now, we've been seeing good corporate taxes moving downwards, and that's generating jobs. Looking long term, I want to ensure that the graduates that are coming out of those university and college programs also have a job to move into as well. So there's a bit of a yin and a yang here, a balance that has to be taken care of as well.
Shelley Melanson, you mentioned concerns about some of the delivery mechanisms. What do you want answers to, or what concerns you?
Well, I think that there was a good point raised about the fact that this is obviously specifically targeted at high school students, and so we have concerns about, the $15 billion that's owed by students who are currently in the system who have graduated. But specifically, the vehicle that they're using is an RESP, and our concern is that we already have a fabulous national system of grants. We think it would actually make more sense to just invest that money directly into the grant system, remove that extra layer. And obviously this is something that would have to be worked out. This is a proposal by the party with consultation from the sector. But if we look historically at relying on registered education savings plans as a method of supporting low-income participation, we actually see lower take-up from lower-income students. And so we think direct investment into the grants program, which identifies you for a financial need, is a better way to go. And I do agree, creating a universal accessible system is the most effective way to create access in education.
Now, we're just a few hours out from hearing this announcement, but have you been able to look at, there are some suggestions that, as the current grants and loan system you mentioned, that if students were to take advantage of this, they might actually disqualify themselves from some of these other grants and loans. Have you had a chance to look at that?
Well, in order to qualify these grants, these are obviously based on income. There would have to be a discussion about how, and there is definitely a potential for these to be offset. At a fundamental level, I think that, this is a positive step forward, but it's not a solution to deal with the systemic issues. What we need, and what students have been calling for, is a national strategy, and that would best come in the form of a National Education Act Act and an actual direction around real funding and new funding for post-secondary education, because the reality is all provinces except for one have made the decision this year to raise tuition fees. And while these kinds of grants or RESPs and this money is important, they're going to get eaten up quite quickly by tuition fee increases if we don't come up with a better long-term strategy.
Dave Quist, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, when we look at the student debt that goes out, we look at the cost of $20,000 plus, and many programs are quite more expensive than that as well, that $1,000 a year is good, but it's not going to solve all those problems that Shelley's already talked about.
Yeah, we should be clear too, that because I know families, we call it student debt, but sometimes these students, it's really a family debt. Families help out with these debt repayments.
And that's another concern, is that if I understand the release today correctly, that this will eliminate the education and book credit transfer, which means that mom and dad who have sometimes used that credit transfer to file their income tax, but then in turn help their own kids, that's going to be eliminated unless there's some other mechanism that's not listed in their press release today. So that's a bit of a concern. I think there's other ways to look at it, how we can deal with education issues at a community level, in terms of, rather than a nanny state, a government getting involved in every aspect from cradle to grave, how can we get businesses and corporations in there to supply more scholarships, more bursaries, more research chairs at foundation or at universities and things of that nature. Again, that's not going to eliminate all the issues around this topic, but it will assist a great deal as well. Appropriate tax credits where necessary.
Shelley, what's your view on that?
Personally, I think that that's not the most effective way. I do think that we need a long-term national federal government strategy to address it. There's certainly, in terms of the presence of corporations on our campuses, there's been huge problems in the past in terms of research misconduct, issues around whistleblower protection, and while I'm not overly opposed, while we are, fairly opposed to the commercialization of research, and we think that there's possibilities for it to be done effectively, I think at the base level what we need to do is develop a long-term strategy. It's nice for corporations to offer scholarships and bursaries, but again, if we don't deal with this underlying issue of underfunding, which, is a result of massive cuts from the 90s, what we're going to continue to see is tuition fees to increase and increase because the funding is simply not there to take that place. Yeah. And so what we need is a national strategy.
Is there, and it sounds like I know where you stand on this, Dave Quist, is there an appreciation in this country, and I think that's what Michael Ignatieff was certainly saying today, is look, what we need to recognize as a nation that, he called it the engine room of the future economy. The young people coming through the system now, through the education system now, are really going to be the drivers of the future economy. Do we get that in this country?
I don't think we fully get it yet. No, I look at here in Eastern Ontario, and we're still producing a lot of school teachers. Not many school districts locally are hiring at this point. They have a lot of teachers on call lists and things of that nature. We need to look at where the needs are, not just today, but down the road as well. And I think that would tie in with the education strategy that Shelley's talking about. We need to be looking to see what are our needs, what are the new job markets that are going to require training and education, a variety of different skill levels, so that we're not planning just for today, but we're looking down the road 5 and 10 years as well to ensure that we're filling those gaps, not just building up surplus skilled people that are never going to find a work in their chosen field.
And when you talk about the average tuition, it's certainly a lot higher than when I was going to university, but how does it compare to, certainly tuition in the United States is a lot higher. If you look at the national scale, how heavily burdened are post-secondary students in this country when it comes to the cost of tuition and post-secondary education?
Well, we know that over 50% of students are borrowing at this point. We know that the vast majority of students who are in study are also working at the same time to be able to finance the cost of their education. And quite frankly, when we look at the reality of the labor market figures when it comes to summer employment for youth and students, we're still seeing much lower numbers than we have in the past. And so this is a pretty tremendous burden. And I think that at this point as well, it's important to remember that those who need access to the post-secondary education system are not just the traditional learners who are coming from high schools. They're not just high school graduates. We're talking about a huge sector of the population who have lost their jobs in the manufacturing industry, who may not have the skills necessary to access a labor market where 70% of new jobs require a post-secondary education. And so what we need to do is create a system that is accessible, that's universally accessible to everyone. And I think that the only way to do that is to ensure that the upfront costs, those user fees, are as low as possible. And if that's a combination of grants as well as new funding to address and reduce the cost of tuition fees, then I think that's what we need to do.
All right, well, it's a good discussion this evening. Thanks for being with us for it. And it's the kind of issue in a campaign that I think people have been waiting to hear. We've had a chance to get at it a little bit tonight, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again. Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.